As many Americans protest against the new Ministry of Disinformation at the Department of Homeland Security, the DHS, citing the sheer Orwellian nature of it, but overlooking the fact that the U.S. already has multiple versions of such a ministry in the forms of the FCC, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the Ad Council, and the favored news sources that will be showered with 150 million tax dollars thanks to the 2021 Portman-Murphy Act. At least one soul in the empire in D.C. is trying to stop it. She's Congresswoman Lauren Boebert, the Republican of Colorado, who has introduced legislation to defund the ministry. Hi everyone, I'm Gardner Goldsmith for MRC-TV, and here's the story. Fox News' Marissa Schultz reports, quote, Boebert's legislation would defund the Disinformation Governance Board and ensure the federal government doesn't have a role in defining what truth is for the American people, end quote. Which begs the question, in a nation state described by its founders as a constitutional representative republic, why does one of its so-called representatives have to propose a bill to stop funding such a clearly unconstitutional gang of tax eaters? Are the vast majority in D.C. so oblivious to the so-called rules that they do whatever they want, nilly-willy, until someone like Boebert tells them to stop? Or do they constantly test the boundaries and see how much they can actually expand those boundaries? Quote, this kind of stuff is terrifying. We in Congress have the power of the purse. It is our duty to shut down this department immediately, Boebert told Fox News Digital Friday in an interview. I'm calling on leadership in the Republican Party, Leader Kevin McCarthy, Whip Steve Scalise, and others to join me in calling for this department to be shut down and defunded, end quote. Which is nice of her to do, but it's only a small start, and it begs more questions. First, many members of Congress acted surprised when DHS head Alejandro Mayorkas announced the creation of the ministry last week. Shouldn't these folks already have known the operations of the Teutonic organization they created in 2002 by melding 22 existing federal agencies to seep even further into state, local, and private affairs? And more to the point, shouldn't they be aware that their constitution doesn't permit the DHS itself? As Judge Andrew Napolitano recently noted, there is absolutely nothing in the U.S. Constitution that allows the creation or funding of a Department of Homeland Security, let alone a Disinformation Governance Board.
DHS was the brainchild of the Bush administration. Many of us argued against it at the time. I'm getting emails this morning from friends and colleagues, a lot of them former colleagues of mine at Fox, saying, hey, Judge, you were right. This is just outrageous. And the powers that the Republican Congress gave to the Republican President, George W. Bush, are now in the hands of a bunch of crazy lefties.
And the hands that are on the levers of political power are not the point. The point is that the claimed political power is illegitimate, writes Schultz, quote, Representatives for McCarthy did not immediately respond to whether he backs this bill or efforts to impeach DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, which Boebert also wants. Scalise supports Boebert's bill. Both Scalise and McCarthy recently signed onto a letter questioning Mayorkas' suitability for office, but didn't specifically raise impeachment, end quote. But why should they have to talk about impeachment of Mayorkas? The office he occupies should not exist and has been part of an illegitimate, ever-growing U.S. police state since Reconstruction.
I mean, you know my opinion of this. The whole Department of Homeland Security is unconstitutional because it's a federal police department, and the Constitution doesn't authorize the federal government to own a police department. That includes the FBI as well.
Especially since the creation of the Prohibition-era darling of the Bureau of Investigation, which was the predecessor to the FBI. The Office of Strategic Services also is one of those wonderful offices that they created, which of course the feds morphed into the CIA. Then there's the NSA and the ATF and the DEA and the drug war-fueled federal push to militarize local and state police. As James Boebert wrote last year for American Conservative, quote, shortly after its creation in 2002, DHS warned local law enforcement agencies to keep an eye on anyone who expressed dislike for attitudes and decisions of the U.S. government as potential terrorists. DHS-funded fusion centers have attached the extremist tag to gun rights activists, anti-immigration zealots, and individuals and groups rejecting federal authority in favor of state or local authority, even though many of the founding fathers shared the same creed. The Pentagon taught soldiers and bureaucrats that people who attended public protests are guilty of low-level terrorism, end quote. And this new DHS arm will officially pump out more of the same. Shouldn't those who swore an oath to uphold the U.S. Constitution look at the larger problem of the DHS itself? And why are they evidently unwilling to do what is required of them under their sworn oath? Perhaps they're too accustomed to the feds breaking their own rules. After all, they not only have kept mum on the DHS itself, they also have not protested that wider array of unconstitutional police agencies and the numerous ministries of truth that previous politicians already have created. If people think this new bureau at the DHS is bad, how about the Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, which was a fascistic and grotesque reworking of the glad-handing Federal Communications Commission, which was a fascistic and grotesque reworking of the glad-handing Federal Radio Commission, FRC, and which literally claims the power to fine people for saying the wrong things. Of course, wrong is defined by government on television and radio. How about the Portman-Murphy Countering Foreign Propaganda Act that was folded into the final National Defense Authorization Act that Obama signed in December of 2016, fed $150 million to favored press outlets, and we may never know all of those, through an office that was put into the Pentagon. That one lasted for 2 years until Trump ended it, and it was revived by Congress and Biden last year. You know, much has been said of leftist Wilson Center darling Nina Jankowicz, the infamous left feminist who will head this new Ministry of Truth at the DHS. But this isn't merely about the woman who will head the new disinformation wing at the Department of Homeland Security. It's not about just a woman who has already shown her keen alacrity for spreading disinformation to such an extent that one can understand her antipathy for freedom of speech. Sure, she's the hack who, as Senator Josh Hawley, Republican of Missouri, recently tweeted, she once wrote, quote, "Last week, I told at NPR Michael, I shudder to think about if free speech absolutists were taking over more platforms, what that would look like for the already marginalized communities, which are already shouldering disproportionate amounts of this abuse." Sure, she hasn't completely flipped. The vast majority of people who were shut down by Twitter and Facebook and blacklisted at Google and YouTube have actually been conservatives, libertarians, vax skeptics, scientific debate promoters, free market Christian anarchists and anti-war activists who just want to basically be left alone. But the point isn't actually just about her, the person in charge. It's about the DHS and the fact that it's part of a vast array of beyond the Constitution police and speech police agencies that have usurped our rights for years. The personality and political posturing of the woman in charge, as much as she draws attention to another illegitimate branch, that is not as important as the illegitimate branch and the network that has been created over decades. Same thing when we look at Representative Boebert and what she's trying to do. We need to look at the larger panoply of these agencies, at the DHS itself, and recognize there is absolutely nothing in the Constitution that allows this. Beyond the Constitution, even if the Constitution did allow it, it would be immoral. Sucking your tax money away without your choice to do that, to create a strong-arm police agency. Homeland Security. Sorry, you can leave that to the Teutons. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Please like and subscribe. If you're watching on YouTube, please make sure that you're subscribed. We'll see you at Rumble as well. Remember, Rumble, they don't censor us, and our numbers are growing at Rumble. You can also find us at Facebook and on Twitter and on TikTok and on Instagram. And on Twitter, I am at Gard Goldsmith, and on Gab, I'm at Gardner Goldsmith. And of course, Gab doesn't censor either. I really like what Andrew Torba does there. Thanks so much for being kindred spirits, everyone. For MRC TV, I'm Gardner Goldsmith.